Aaron, where are you? Where is Aaron right now? You done messed up, Aaron!
Aaron is right here, you guys. I am so excited to do this video with you guys today and share this with you. I honestly can't believe what I just read. Chris Shelton has just proven beyond a reasonable doubt that jury foreman Earl Batiste, the foreman of the jury in the Danny Masterson criminal trial, without question committed a felony by lying on his jury questionnaire form. And what is incredible to me is that Chris just published an interview that he did with Earl Batiste. And it seems as if Chris thinks this interview exonerates Earl. I'm not sure. I haven't asked him, but I've read through this whole thing, and it is presented as if Chris is debunking a video, actually more than one video that I did this past week, revealing that the jury foreman in the Masterson case failed to reveal that his own son had been successfully criminally prosecuted for crimes against children. And not only that, but that his son was prosecuted by the exact same division of the LA District Attorney's Office that was now prosecuting Danny Masterson. And somehow, Mr. Batiste failed to disclose this on the jury questionnaire. Now, in the reporting that I did on this past week, I didn't have any copies of the actual jury questionnaire. So there was a lot of speculation going on as to whether the appropriate questions that would have caught something like this were in fact on the questionnaire or not. Or whether the questions were on the questionnaire, and perhaps Earl did disclose this, but somehow the staff in the DA's office missed all of this and didn't take it up during the voir dire process. And yet, so Chris does this interview apparently to debunk my video, and in the process absolutely drives all of the nails into Earl's coffin as far as having committed this felony. So it gives me great pleasure to present to you this interview. This was a published written interview, so I'm going to show you the most applicable sections here. Guys, let's take a look at this. Now, I'm going to censor some of the words as I read them off the page as to not cross any lines, any YouTube guidelines that exist, because I want this video to be spread as far and wide as possible. Okay, so Chris goes, some claims were made in regards to your reporting on the jury questionnaire about the conviction of your son in regards to an assault against children. Were you asked in the jury process on the form about previous convictions of family members? And if so, did you report about that? Earl says, no, I wasn't asked that question. And no, I didn't say anything about it, but I was not asked. Chris says, okay, so it wasn't on the jury form. Earl says, no. Now, Chris manages to get his hands on the jury questionnaire. I believe Tony Ortega may have published this questionnaire back when it was originally handed out to all the jurors. Question number 10, have you or any family member ever been arrested for or convicted of any crime? If so, for what type of crime? How long ago was the incident? What was the result? Question 11, have you, any family member or close friend been involved in a dispute in which the police were called? If so, please explain. Question 12, have you or anyone close to you ever been the victim of or accused of a crime of a sexual nature? If so, how long ago? Please explain. Oopsie, Earl just forgot. So we already have at this early stage in the interview, Earl is on record as either having a memory so poor as to be completely unuseful or to be willing to completely lie about something that is easily proven with documentation. So that's strike one straight off from the beginning. Okay, Chris goes, after my initial conversation with Earl, I obtained a copy of the actual jury questionnaire that was used in the Masterson case. As you can see, there were 3 questions that should have required Earl to divulge that he had a son with a conviction for a sex crime. I called him back and asked him about that. Did you feel those questions didn't apply to you? Earl, I last lived with him in 1996. So Earl's talking about his son, Earl Jr. So I last lived with him in 1996. And these things that were told to me about Earl Jr.'s case were hearsay. Keep that in mind, guys. It's going to matter later. I never talked to my son about it. And I've never been to anything related to anything going on with him legally. I've heard about the things with Earl, but I answered the questions on the form to the best of my ability. I didn't know that firsthand. Well, firsthand, you don't know it firsthand unless you were there with your son while he was committing the crimes. Like, this is kind of a cop-out. So I didn't know firsthand. I heard the stories. I knew what people had told me. People, not your son. You never spoke to your own son about the crimes he was accused and convicted of? Sounds a little suspect to me. But my son has never talked to me about that ever. And you've never talked to him about it? I think that's part of the reason he doesn't talk to me. I've been as honest as possible about everything. Now, guys, I realize people read things differently. The first time I read this through, I interpreted this paragraph to mean that he has not spoken to his son or his son has not spoken to him since 1996. Now, I realize that's not literally what it says, but it is the impression. It is what I came away. It's the impression I came away with after reading this for the first time. Just keep that in mind because he 100% proves that's not true later on. Okay, so now Chris goes back to the original conversation. When did the defense team contact you about the affidavit that you submitted? So guys, real quick, I'm sorry to keep having to explain things in here. Part of the coverage that I did wasn't just that Earl's son was convicted of this crime and Earl never disclosed it to the attorneys, but that when Danny Masterson's defense team submitted a motion a week or so ago to the court to have the charges dismissed because the case is now going to be retried. The original case ended in a hung jury and a mistrial. Included in the motion to dismiss was an actual affidavit from Earl Batiste, the jury foreman, saying that in Earl's opinion, no other reasonable jury would ever unanimously convict Danny Masterson. In other words, Earl was actually helping the defense team try to get the charges thrown out. Very suspicious behavior. Okay, so Chris goes, when did the defense team contact you about the affidavit that you submitted? You mean the conversation that I had with him? What is there to clarify here, Earl? The affidavit that you submitted. Chris, yeah, the affidavit that you signed stating that you felt the case should not be retried and the defense used that to try to get the case dismissed. That, Earl says, that was done about 2 weeks or so after the trial was over. Chris, okay, can you tell me exactly what happened? Earl, on the day the trial ended, we were a hung jury. The defense and prosecution asked if they could come back and talk to the jurors who wanted to talk. All 13 said yes. We stayed there and talked to them. All 4 of them came back and were asking us questions. Cohen asked about Scientology. Mueller asked about some of the main points that we were talking about. We talked about the evidence that was presented versus what was said in their first statements. Again, all of this, blah, 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 not even an answer to the question that was asked. We went through all of that. Then at the end, the defense attorney asked me if I would be willing to talk to them about the jury deliberations. I said, sure, no problem. They called me a week later. We talked a bit. And then a week after that, they called me again and we talked. And then she finally emailed me the affidavit and I sent it back to her. Okay. I mean, what's really at issue here isn't, oh, gee, can you tell us exactly whether this occurred over phone or email or in person? The issue is, why did you agree to complete or sign an affidavit to help the defense get the charges thrown out? That's really what's at issue. Not how many times did they call you or did they send you an email. So he totally, dodges what's really at issue. Chris goes, okay, so it was all done over email and phone calls and after they met you in the jury room after the trial. Earl goes, correct. Okay, can you tell me what it is that compelled you to do the affidavit? I mean, did they try to get that? Did they try to get all of the jurors to do that? Earl goes, yes, they did. They asked all the jurors. Now, right away, I have to go, how do you know, Earl? How can you represent what the lawyers actually did? All you can represent is what you were told. So, okay, they asked all the jurors and they told me in the conversation that they reached out to all the jurors. Well, they might have just told you that, Earl. Like, who cares? It doesn't mean it's true, But okay, fine. It's just something they're telling you for right now. But it's not often that they get all jurors to respond. But I knew they had talked to others because we were talking about one juror in particular who was stuck on guilty no matter what. And they knew his name. So they already knew his name. I never told them his name, but they knew his name. And I said, well, you got it right. Well, isn't it interesting that Earl is admitting that he was confirming information for the defense attorneys? Like, were they, why did they have to ask Earl whether they had it right? Anyway, I might be reading too much into that. So obviously they were talking to other people. They said, we've talked to other jurors and we're reaching out to everyone to see who will get responses from. I was not the only one. Guys, Earl doesn't answer the damn question, and Chris doesn't ask it again. I don't know why. They weren't under a time crunch. This wasn't a live interview. This was just a private phone conversation. He said, what compelled you to do the affidavit? And then he dilutes his question by asking a second question without getting an answer to the first. Did they try to get all jurors to do that? So Earl chooses only to answer the second part of the question. Chris doesn't get Earl to answer the first part of the question, which is actually the most important part of the question. What compelled you, Earl, to cooperate with the defense team to get the charges against Danny Masterson dismissed? Believe it or not, Chris Shelton never goes back and gets this question answered. Chris, the question that is basically being raised bluntly is your credibility because of a failure to report the thing with your son. You know, in a sexually charged case like this, how could there not be a conflict of interest there? What are your thoughts about that? Okay, well, again, Chris asks a question and then he dilutes it by asking a follow-on question. What you really want to ask here is, how could there not be a conflict of interest? Not what are your thoughts about how there could not be a conflict of interest. Again, maybe I'm being too picky. Okay, Earl, whatever questions I answered truthfully. I didn't omit or add anything. There was even one question they asked, do I have any friends or family in law enforcement? I had one friend in this, is that the Border Patrol? What's the CBP? Customs and Border Patrol, right. And that was that. That was true. They never asked me if I was a former police officer or not, which I was, but they didn't ask me that. Oh, so they're asking you if you have any friends or family that are police officers, but oops, you don't count. It's like, give me a break. But on the one that I answered, it asked me if I had any contact with the police, any prior convictions, arrests, or whatever. And I gave them an instance in 1996 where I had contact with police. And during the voir dire, the judge asked me about it. I said what it was, and she goes, okay, we're fine. And they moved on. So that was it. The very idea that the prosecution or the court or the state or whatever would want to know if you've had any contact with the police, but wouldn't want to know if you yourself had been a police officer. I think this does speak a little bit to Earl's, I want to say state of mind, but I really mean his interpretation or analysis of what is important information and not really honoring the spirit of the law, but only the letter of the law. I don't know. I'll talk to my attorney friend, Zach Morgan, about which one of those is more proper. Like, if you're in a setting like this, does the spirit of the law matter? Or is the letter of the law what everyone is just going to swear by? Because you see what I mean? This, to me, is dishonest behavior. But a lawyer could argue, well, it wasn't really dishonest because they didn't really ask him if he was a police officer. And you go, okay, that's cute. That's cute. Okay, Chris goes, did it ever occur to you that you could come up, that could come up as a potential conflict of interest? Earl goes, what part? Come on, guys. This guy's not being honest at all. What part do you think we're talking about? Like, take your pick. Okay. Apparently, the fact that your son is convicted of a sexual crime, Earl, that's kind of, is there something else in this conversation that would be more likely to come up as a conflict? Earl goes, no, because I don't have that kind of relationship with him. What kind of relationship, Earl? The one where you're the father and he's the son? I mean, the question did ask you about family members. So you just got done saying how you didn't divulge that you were a police officer, had been a police officer, because it didn't specifically ask you that. But when it does specifically ask you about family members who've been convicted of felonies or whatever, you have even more reasons why you didn't need to answer that question. I don't have that kind of relationship with him. He and I haven't spoken in a very long time. Keep that in mind. Again, a throwback, making it seem like maybe it was 1996. We don't say happy birthday or Merry Christmas or anything like that. Keep that in mind, because he's going to contradict himself later on. Chris goes, and would you mind telling me what happened? Because the reason I ask is because Nina mentioned to me last night. Nina is Earl's daughter. Nina is the one who introduced Chris and Earl for their original interview. Nina mentioned to me last night, when this was coming up, that you in fact, or you and your wife had in fact taken action to have him turned in. Earl goes, it wasn't me. That was all my ex-wife. I had nothing to do with that. Chris is actually trying to throw this guy a lifeline. Well, weren't you actually involved in turning your son in for these heinous crimes against children? Earl's like, wasn't me. I'm no snitch. Unbelievable. And also keep in mind, that means Nina told Chris that Earl had participated in turning in his son, and it turned out not to be true. Now, there is a possibility that Chris simply just misunderstood what Nina had said to him. And in fact, as I read this, I'm guessing that's actually what occurred. But really, what do I know? It's hilarious to me that Earl's backtracking from the lifeline Chris is trying to throw to him. It wasn't me. That was all my ex-wife. I had nothing to do with that. Okay, so Chris goes, would you be willing to tell me briefly what happened? And Earl goes, with Earl or with the situation? Come on, guys. It's pretty clear what the question is about here. Okay, Chris, well, with your son, with what happened there, with your son, because I'm in a total mystery. All I know is there's a conviction on record, and I don't have any specifics of what actually occurred. Guys, this is a perfect example where when you commit a crime, just shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. Don't make public appearances. Don't make public statements. Get a lawyer. Shut your mouth. Earl's hanging himself in this interview. So, okay, Earl goes, I don't mind. If you did the research, you'd find it. But what happened? So my ex-wife was married to a guy named David, and David had children. So all of them lived together. My kids, Earl, my son, lived with his mom, and my other son, Adam, and David and his children, okay? One of the kids was a young girl. She was about 12 or 13 at the time, and I think Earl might have been 18. Not sure how old your son was. Not buying it. Something happened where he touched her, and they called the police, and they made this case. I wasn't living with them. I had contact with my kids. Keep that in mind. I had contact with my kids. But at that time, Earl, after that, for some reason, and I really don't know why, I've got a text message I sent to him like a year ago or so, just asking him what was going on. Okay, I'm going to finish reading and then we'll get to it. I didn't really ask him why he doesn't call or stay in touch, you know? So it still sounds like he hasn't spoken to his son since this incident back in 96, right? Or was it 96? Okay, we'll see. He used to be really good about keeping in touch with everyone, but then he didn't even start keeping in touch with his own kids. I'm taking care of them, my grandsons. So I do know that he got accused of touching this girl, and then he admitted to it. So yeah, he admitted to it, and he was arrested. And after being arrested, he admitted that he did it. So that's what happened. Earl, earlier in the interview, already made it sound like he didn't really have any information about this. Everything he knew about this case was just hearsay. His son's case was just hearsay. He never spoke to his son about it. His son never spoke to him about it. And yet here he is regurgitating blow by blow some pretty specific details about the case. Earl, it just seems like if you could divulge all this information to Chris Shelton, you could have divulged all this information to the state in the jury questionnaire. I really wonder why you chose not to, because your reasons so far aren't, as they say, holding water. I really just cannot get over the sentence where he goes, but at that time, Earl, now at this point, Earl's talking about his son, Earl Jr. At that time, Earl Jr., for some reason, and I really just don't know why, I think the implication here is just dropped out of touch. I was never able to reach him ever again. He doesn't say that, but it's what it seems like he's saying, right? But at that time, Earl, after that, for some reason, I really don't know why, I've got a text message I sent to him like a year ago or so, just asking him what was going on. Does it not read to you like he hasn't heard from his son since 1996, and he just sent him a text message last year after like 20 some years being like, Earl, I haven't heard from you in a long time. What's going on, son? Like, do you read it the way I'm reading it? Because that's how I read it. Okay, moving on. Chris, okay, I got it. So he went guilty, and then he got his punishment, and that was that. Earl, yes. Chris, okay, fair enough. And so when was the last time you've actually spoken with him? Okay, now we're getting to the heart of the matter. Earl goes, I've got it on my phone. Hold on for a second. It looks like I cleared that out. Okay, the moment I read that sentence, I'm like, cleared it out? What, you're either talking about a phone call record or a text message record. My phone calls in my call history on my phone automatically, like it only goes back a week or two. I mean, there's no way it goes back more than a month. And then you go, cleared it out. I thought you hadn't been in touch with the guy for like 20 years. What is it that you cleared out? Okay, anyway. He goes, but I'm going to guess and say the last time I talked to him was probably April or May of last year. What the heck? He made it sound like he wasn't in touch with his son all this time and just had no idea why his son dropped out of touch after this criminal conviction. And then he said earlier, I didn't disclose this issue on the questionnaire because we just don't have that kind of relationship. Now, look, if you've been estranged from your son for 30 years and you knew that he was convicted of something, but you've never even seen him or spoken to him since then, and you don't know anything about the case, and you've only heard about it from other people, I can kind of, sort of, maybe get behind the, guys, to me, he's essentially a non-entity. Now he's revealing they're literally still in touch, have always been in touch, perhaps not very often, but actually it gets even better. Check this out. I've tried to talk to him, but I don't know. And I haven't really investigated why he has responded the way he has. I've always been reasonable with him, even after the things that he's gone through. I extended an olive branch, taking his kids shopping for school, my grandkids, but something happened where he just believes for some reason he has something against me. I don't know what, but I never really tried to follow up on it. Earl, just keep your mouth shut. The contradictions in your story is going to be what buries you. You just admitted that you believe he has something against me. But earlier in the conversation, you said you had no idea why he dropped out of touch with you. It's a mystery to you. Now you're saying it's because he has something against you. There's a million reasons why somebody might drop out of touch. They might not have something against you personally, but now you're revealing that you have a lot more knowledge about this situation than you were letting on earlier in the interview. Okay, so Chris goes, so you would classify this as an estranged relationship? Oh, absolutely. I sent him last year, whatever Father's Day was, I sent him a message, Happy Father's Day. And even on his birthday, Happy Birthday. He already said earlier in the interview that they don't have the kind of relationship where you say happy birthday or Merry Christmas, and yet here he is saying that just this last birthday and Christmas, he was messaging his son, happy birthday and Merry Christmas. So if there was an estrangement, the example Earl is giving of this estranged relationship is he didn't even answer me this year when I texted him happy birthday or Merry Christmas. Well, Earl, I thought he hadn't been answering you for 20 years. For you to even message him happy birthday or Merry Christmas this year tends to indicate that perhaps you expected a response. Perhaps you've been in touch with him. Anyway, you guys have ears, you guys have eyes. You're reading the same stuff I'm reading. So his birthday is August, no response on Father's Day, no response on his birthday, no response to Merry Christmas. So I just left it alone. So you just left it alone now. Not 2 years ago, not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago. You're clearly in touch with your son. Chris, were you ever or are you ever aware of having been contacted by anybody connected with the Church of Scientology with regards to this case or otherwise? So, and he says no. For the record, in my video, I have never once alleged or implied that Scientology had been in touch with Earl. In fact, the likelihood of Scientology's involvement in this, if Scientology is involved, would be many steps removed from Earl or his daughter Nina. That is something that is crystal clear. Scientology would never put things at risk by directly contacting Earl or his daughter Nina, or even having someone who is directly connected to them make contact with Earl or Nina. That's just not how Scientology works. Mark Headley and I are going to do an extensive conversation about that, a live chat about that later today. Now let's move on to a very short conversation that Chris had with Earl's daughter, Nina. Let's see how this begins. So Chris goes, I also spoke with Nina. I've been proud to consider her a friend for a few years now, and those raising questions about why a young black woman in Los Angeles might watch my videos, well, it was painful to think that we still have people who think like that. What on earth is Chris Shelton referring to? Let me show you exactly what Chris is referring to. Here is an excerpt of the first video that I did about this Earl failing to disclose this issue about his son. Here's an excerpt where I mention, now, what are the chances that a young black woman in Los Angeles would be a fan of Chris Shelton's? Check this out. Chris Shelton said that Earl's daughter reached out to Chris and said, Chris, I'm such a big fan of yours. I'm going to talk my father into doing an interview with you. Now, guys, let's just talk statistics here. This is Chris Shelton's YouTube channel. His latest videos, and I'm just rounding to the nearest, I'm not rounding, I'm just going to cite the nearest large number. 1,000 views, 2,000 views, 1,000 views, 2,000 views, 2,000, 3,000, 15,000, 9,000, 10,000, 2,000, 1,000, 5,000. Let's look at the live streams. 1,000 views, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 2,000. Guys, what is the statistical likelihood that a young black woman in Los Angeles just happens to be a fan of Chris Shelton and her father happened to be selected for the Masterson jury? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's incredibly unlikely. All righty then. Now, here's the thing, guys. Chris is kind of a far left person. And what we have here is what you often see with the far left, whereas they're trying to virtue signal, but through their virtue signaling, they're exposing their own racial bias. So I question how a young black woman in LA would be a fan of Chris Shelton. And Chris assumes that I'm insulting the young black woman. I got news for you, buddy. She's not the one. I could have said just young woman in LA and it would have meant the exact same thing. Nina Nicole happens to be a young, attractive black woman, and there's nothing wrong with being black. Is there, Chris? Because all I did was simply describe her for what she is. Well, I didn't say attractive. What would a young, attractive black woman in LA, what are the chances? I didn't just say, what are the chances that she's a fan of Chris Shelton? I said, what are the chances that a young black woman in LA just happens to be a fan of Chris Shelton's and her father just happens to be selected to this jury? And by the way, as far as we're talking about what are the chances, when Chris originally told the story of how Nina popped up on the scene and made this introduction to her father, he told the story as if she had just messaged him. Like that she was just revealing herself. Oh, by the way, I'm a longtime fan. And it just so happens that my father was the jury foreman. That seems very unlikely. If Chris had actually said he had been in touch with Nina for the last 3 or 4 years, that's a completely different situation. That's completely different. And even in my video, you'll see that I did say, it's not impossible. It's just statistically unlikely. So what exactly was I talking about? It just seems to me that a young, attractive black woman in Los Angeles between school and work and social life probably has an awful lot going on. And when she's looking through her calendar being like, what do I have going on this week? I just don't see her going, you know what? Cancel plans on Wednesday. Chris Shelton's dropping another 3-hour banger on the pitfalls of growing up in Mormonism, part 2. That's all I meant. And it speaks to Chris's mindset that he hears me describe someone as a young black woman and questioning why she would be a fan of his. And he thinks I'm insulting her. He thinks I'm saying she must not be smart enough or big-brained enough to comprehend the high-level ideas and concepts that are discussed over on Chris's channel. Man, that's not it at all. But now we get a sense of what you think when you hear someone described as a young black woman. It's like when you hear someone go, oh my God, requiring an ID to vote? That's racist. That disenfranchises people of color. And you go, are you listening to yourself? You're the one saying that people of color either don't know how or can't afford to get photo ID. So the virtue signaling ain't gonna work here, Chris. Nobody was questioning how a young black woman could be smart enough to be interested in your channel. But it is interesting to see that is immediately where your mind goes, and that's what you assume was meant. Unbelievable. All right, let's keep going because this actually gets pretty interesting. Okay, so Nina goes, people are gonna say, why didn't the daughter tell him? But I couldn't tell him anything the minute he was on that jury. It was like, I can't say anything to you. I can't talk to you about anything. I wasn't in a position to say, like, Dad, you got to look at this video. Let me show you this. He didn't know my obsession with Scientology or North Korea or, Heaven's Gate and all these different cults. Whoa. We're off into the weeds. Are we talking about the fact that you weren't allowed to talk to your dad about the case when he was on the jury? Or are you saying you don't have a close enough relationship with your dad for him to know the things that you're interested about? Why are you talking about North Korea and Heaven's Gate and cults? Did you only start researching cults when your dad was selected for the jury? That doesn't add up because Chris is saying, and you're saying, that you've been in touch with Chris for like 4 years. So again, the message here is getting diluted, if not invalidated, because she's trying to make one point and she instead is making a completely different point. And I have for you evidence that what Nina's saying here is actually BS. Go to Nina's own Facebook page and you will see that smack dead center in the middle of Danny Masterson trial taking place, Nina Nicole is reposting Facebook posts from Leah Remini explicitly discussing Danny Masterson's attacks on his victims. Now you go, Aaron, that's just Facebook. Guys, I'm not going to show you all of the Facebook activity between Nina and her father and her brothers. Nina is all over her father's Facebook page during the trial. And Nina's posting to Facebook during the trial explicit messages, posts from Leah Remini about the trial, about the attacks, all in support of the victims and everything. So it does make one wonder, what in the world is going on here? Now, again, there are things that I've said about this that are pure speculation, but part of the speculation, it's okay to speculate, guys. It's okay to speculate. If the jury had come back to convict Danny Masterson, I ask you legal experts out there, could the defense team have gone to the judge and said, Judge, we have a problem. The daughter of the jury foreman is posting on Facebook, and there's evidence that she's active on her father's Facebook page, her father's active on her Facebook page, is posting from Facebook's giant, and one would say legally biased, opinions and reporting about this trial. We ask for a mistrial. And so that's my question to you guys. Is this problematic behavior from the daughter of a jury foreman on Facebook to be happening right smack dab in the middle of a trial that her father is on the jury of? And yet here in the interview, Nina's emphasizing how important it was that she couldn't share any information about anything with her dad during the trial. And you go, except on Facebook? I mean, you're making it seem like you really understand why it was important you not give any information to your dad, but you're posting it on Facebook where your dad is active. This, to me, is still suspicious behavior. Again, I'm not saying Scientology is behind it. But if Scientology were associated with this, we wouldn't know that. We wouldn't see it. Nina wouldn't even know it if by chance she was somehow influenced by Scientology. Now, the fact that Nina's been in touch with Chris Shelton for 3 or 4 years makes the likelihood that she was influenced by Scientology pretty damn near close to zero. That's new information Chris is providing here about them being in touch for 4 years. But you can't blame someone for asking questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. Chris Shelton is supposed to be the critical thinker at large. I believe asking questions about things that don't make sense has something to do with critical thinking. And when you're dealing with Scientology, Chris is one of those guys who's out there that says it's always worse than you think. It's always worse than you think. And yet the moment questions get raised about something that Chris was involved in, he gets hyper defensive about it instead of going, wait, maybe these are valid questions. And let's just treat them as what they are. Valid questions, not attacks. Okay, so let's keep going here. Nina goes, you know, Chris, I've talked to you for 4 years. There's no way that I set this up in 2019. No one's ever accused Nina of setting anything up. You know, let me butter up Chris. That's crazy. Yeah, no one's ever accused her of that. I mean, I have a past history of talking to you about random things as far as Scientology and other stuff. Your videos are a more thorough, a lot more cerebral, the type I like, you know? There's a type of journalism there that was more in line with the way I think. So that's why I reached out to you. I'm not sure if she means as opposed to Tony Ortega or as opposed to me, because I don't practice journalism. That's not what I do. But Tony claims to practice journalism. So maybe she's talking about Tony. I don't know. Chris, it's quite something to be misrepresented this way. I wish I could say this is the first time this has happened to me, but it's not. I literally have no idea what Chris is talking about. Who misrepresented Chris Shelton? Who misrepresented Nina? 0 representations have been made about Nina or Chris Shelton. The question was whether the defense attorney team itself had found, once they found out, or the question was if they found out that Earl had this thing in his past that he hadn't disclosed, or if they found out that he was very much in favor of helping the defense get the charges thrown out, if the defense team had orchestrated the interview, even based on everything Chris Shelton has disclosed in this new interview, it's still very much a possibility based on the facts that are on the table. Nina knew of Chris Shelton. Nina knew her dad was on the jury. Nina clearly has a close relationship with her dad, or at least it seems that they do. So even after the trial ended, Nina would have told her father, if she hadn't already, that she knows Chris Shelton and can access Chris Shelton. So Earl would have had that information. Earl was cooperating with the defense attorneys. Earl would have told the defense attorneys that his daughter Nina knows Chris Shelton. It's totally possible that the defense attorneys said, hey, have your daughter reach out to Chris and ask him if they will do this interview with you, where you can then repeat all of our talking points about how unbelievable the Jane Does were and how no reasonable jury could ever convict Danny Masterson. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying even given the facts that are on the table, that is absolutely something that is within the realm of possibility. But Chris just can't deal with the fact that he might have been played. That he might have been played. Instead of going, geez, is that possible? He just takes it as an outright attack. And it's not an attack. This is how Scientology works. And even if Scientology wasn't involved in this is absolutely how a defense team would work or could work, whether it's actually what happened or not. And there's just a little bit more of the interview where Nina is responding to things I never said of how could a black person be interested in Scientology? Literally, the words never came out of my mouth. I never questioned why a young black woman would be interested in Scientology. I questioned the statistical likelihood that given Chris Shelton's videos get an average of 1,000 views. I said, statistically speaking, what are the chances that one of his fans just happens to be a young black woman in Los Angeles whose father just happens to have been selected on the jury for the biggest Scientology trial in decades? And I was very clear, guys. I said it's not impossible. It's just statistically unlikely. And yet it looks like lightning really did indeed strike twice, if not 3 times. And somewhat predictably, to be perfectly honest, if you've watched much of Chris's content, somewhat predictably, he goes and makes it about race, racism, makes it about him, does the whole virtue signaling thing, and all because he can't stand the fact that he might have been played by the defense. To be clear, it was the defense that I have speculated would be behind orchestrating this interview, not Scientology. But you're going to hear later on in my chat with Mark Headley the various ways in which Scientology very well may have been involved in all this. We don't know, but that's the point. You wouldn't know. So it's worth understanding and researching and dissecting how Scientology has done things like this in the past in order to understand the likelihood or the possibility of it also happening in the present. All right, everyone, this is a hot one, so let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you to everyone for watching and listening. Thanks to everyone who watches until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.